Okay, my name is Anne Reifenstein, and I am a retired Canadian Army officer. I spent 29 years serving in the Canadian Armed Forces. Right now, I am working in future planning in the Canadian Defense Academy and hoping to help design what the future professional development learning ecosystem will look like. That's such a it's a really good question, and it's a really interesting metaphor. The challenge is actually like, okay, so what do I want? And you always get dragged into some picture of a Caribbean island in your head, right? When I think about the archipelago of design and the variety of things, I think mine island, if you will, is a buildup. It's little bits of everybody else's islands. So I don't know if I have a design philosophy of my own. I've been plugged into the design community for a number of years now, 5, 6, 7 years. I continuously am learning from the experts within this area and taking bits and pieces of it that make sense to make it so when I'm faced with problems, I'm using a design thinking approach. So I guess if you had to put like a signpost on my island, I say, design thinking is the start point here. And when I'm thinking about design, I like to think about, well, what would this model of design tell me? What would this model of design tell me? And none of them are perfect, and none of them are right, and none of them are wrong, but some of them fit better than others. And there's elements of those processes or those ideas in that design methodologies that can work for any sort of state of problem. So it's a very broad living space that has all sorts of little facets to it, if you will, that present an island. So it wouldn't be one big block where I can say, oh, well, and this is design and how I think it should be. It's more of, ooh, this bit's interesting. And oh, that's interesting. It would be kind of like an episode of Hoarders, if you will. So it'd be like I'm hoarding all sorts of little ideas that I've stolen from other people. That doesn't make it sound very appealing to visit, but nonetheless, that's I think that's the best way of taking that analogy and how that works for me. Don't get caught up in the processes too hard. Always think this is a tool. It's not an entity unto itself. And I think that's one of the things for most people who employ design and weren't working solely in the design world. It's a tool that you use to help inform you, educate you, decision support tool, all of those things to kind of help you understand a broader, larger problem. So that's what it is. It's a tool. And for some people, that toolbox is huge and enormous. And for some people like me, it's, varies in size. And, like I said, as much stuff as I can pluck in and see what works for me. There's some approaches for design that don't work, that don't resonate, that don't click in your head. And that doesn't mean you're doing design wrong from my perspective. It just means that that's something that doesn't work with the way you think or approach, or maybe not with that particular problem space. So you need to be open to a whole bunch of ideas and keep collecting those ideas, and then think about, how would I use this? How would I that? And how does it help me advance my understanding of how I want to use it? My elevator pitch is I use design thinking to support understanding difficult, challenging problem spaces, things that are messy. And unfortunately, as much as we like things to be in pillars, and as much as we'd like things to be in neat lines and flow, more often than not, things are messy. And I think design thinking and using those tools and picking and selecting the tools that work for you and that will work in that particular problem space are ways to be able to deal with the messiness of what it is we're going with. It's never just one thing. If I give you more money and give you more equipment or more people, none of those actually will usually ever solve the problem. More usually isn't the answer. What I need to do is usually the answer. One of my personality traits is I'm very open to creativity and I'm open to new things. I really get excited by new things and I really like the new things. And that's why probably I find it very easy to take a look at a whole bunch of different ways of slicing and dicing and looking at problems. And I'm not interested in revisiting a set methodology, if you will. So perhaps I would say that in terms of how I exercise, am I a design practitioner or do I use design? That's one of the things. I actually wouldn't say I'm necessarily a design practitioner, but I am someone who's conscious of how design can help me understand and help me build and help communicate certain ideas. One of the things that's really of value and I think is really important in design is the concept of storytelling and the building of a narrative as part of understanding a problem space. And I think that can't be discounted too much because it's a way of communicating ideas without using the design word. There's a challenge there because a lot of people treat design as a religion. And you're from a certain school of design and you practice this design and this is the way and all others are unworthy compared to this particular approach. I think the challenge with taking that is by locking yourself in, you lose some of the value of what it can bring to you. And you're forcing then the problem space into the design practice as opposed to applying the design practice to the problem space. And so that's kind of my fundamental. I think about this. Is this a design problem? Is this something that I can use some of the ideas and thoughts and the methodologies in design practice to advance my understanding, to advance other people's understanding of this particular problem space? So I use a fair bit of design thinking and design methodologies in my everyday workspace. So I'm starting up a new thing in a challenging problem space that's very complex. It is within trying to shape and manage an ecosystem. It is a professional development or a learning ecosystem, if you will, for the Canadian Armed Forces. And when you're trying to understand it, everything's got a relationship and it's certainly not linear in terms of its construct. So one of the things I use, I'm a very visual person. If you go into my office, a couple of people came into my office yesterday and say, ooh, this is like the movie, A Beautiful Mind. Because what I've done is I've mapped out using different methodologies, different ways, and brought in other people. And it's a great way of communicating and getting a narrative. And every time I have a conversation about what I think this particular thing looks and tells me, I communicate that to somebody. And then they give me more feedback. And then I put some more notes or some more stickies or some more marker drawings in a bigger picture. I add on to the picture. And that picture becomes more and more, not dense, but I would say has greater depth to it as I move along. And what that does is that starts informing some of okay, so what do I do with this? How do I take these ideas? Where's the area that I can affect? And then what tangible actions can I do to shape that overall system? So coming up with the challenges in terms of culture change in the training and educational realm in the CAF. And that's what I'm working on. And it's not easy because it's not simply, I'll show everybody this PowerPoint slide and we've got organizational change. Thanks very much. That's great. It's much messier than that. If we could do that, that would be awesome. Because I can whip together a hell of a PowerPoint slide. But, that's not going to work. So how do we do this? How do we shape that space? And that's where the tools that I've gotten from paying attention to really good design practitioners have been enormously helpful. This is where I'm using it in the world right now. So I'm using it to see how does the role that training and education plays in organizational culture change within the CAF to make it more inclusive for the variety of the Canadian populace, right? Where are those systemic barriers? How do we find those systemic barriers? And then within the training and education realm, and then how do we best go about addressing those, fixing it, creating better solution spaces, making it better for everybody going ahead. And that's really the stuff I'm pulling on to do that work. A lot of it is based on design and design thinking. Well, I'm really excited actually about building and mapping the Canadian Armed Forces learning ecosystem. So I was brought up in the military and I got most of my education through the Canadian Armed Forces. A couple master's degrees, a couple undergraduate degrees, And also, you can't discount the experiential learning that went on with that as well. Shaping that system to have it so it's what we want it to look like going forward and supporting the Canadian Armed Forces writ large in the future, I think that's really exciting. Working with a team of people and working with all sorts of different folks and bringing that together, that's really interesting and exciting space to work in. So that's what I'm working on right now. And that is really an exciting area. So design to me is a way of thinking about a problem space and having a diversity of tools to be able to deliver on better understanding and potential actions to take. To that end, I think a common misconception is that it's super time intensive. Like you've got to spend days and days and days doing this. I mentioned something, it would be really good if we could get, a design team to come in and facilitate doing, a design exercise on this problem space. And they say, nobody's got the time to do that. I think that's a challenge space in terms of what's been constructed is people believe this to be always has to be a super long, intensive, all-encompassing thing. And it's not tools in the toolbox. It's not, okay, so let's take a look at this. I'm sure there's people who are real design practitioners, who are good design practitioners and are brilliant at doing this, who are like cringing right now at what I'm saying. But I think you can take slices of it. And I think you can slice it to make it fit what you need it to do to support the people that you're trying to do it with. I find quite often that I engage in design activities and design methodologies in the workplace. I just don't use the D word, and there's much less resistance to it. It's like, oh, well, let's call it this. And, I don't call it design. And that's directly where I'm pulling the ideas or the methodologies or the processes or the practices from, is from the design world. When I initially retired from the Canadian Armed Forces, I actually found it incredibly challenging. And I knew it was going to be challenging. We moved to Europe and I wasn't able to work. My spouse was working with NATO and I couldn't get a job over there, which at first seemed like really great, right? Because you're retired, you're living in Europe, you get to travel. It's super interesting and super fun. The challenge came when, after a couple months, when it wasn't fun anymore. And I didn't have a purpose. Like I was, for 30 plus years, I woke up in the morning and I had a purpose when I woke up. I had to go into work, or I had, this project on the go or that project on the go. I didn't have anything. And I realized what I had satisfaction that I was getting out of, like that purpose, that sense of, oh, this is why I'm getting out of bed in the morning. It wasn't, I had been getting all of that from going to work every day. However, what was really interesting, design, and I won't say I sat down and did a big, but understanding the network and the interrelationship, I would say that I actually kind of mapped out some things that I could do that provided me ways to explore things that I wouldn't try. And so I kind of used a design process, if you will, to figure out what it is I could do that would provide me that level of purpose or satisfaction or sense of accomplishment besides traveling to various places. So I discovered podcasting and I started building a podcasting business, and I've worked in that, and I've produced 3 or 4 now, and I do private contracting, and I do a lot of stuff, but I wouldn't have been able to figure that out because it was a really indirect path I used to get to that point in terms of what do I want to do? What do I like to do? How do I figure that out? What does that look like? Can I monetize this in any way? Or is this just like a one-way stream going out the door, like a hobby, right? Hobbies are things you pay to do, right? As opposed to somebody paying you to do something. And I would say that the design process, or having that ability to think about challenge spaces or issues, it helped me get to the crux of the issue. And then it helped me come up with ways of building different aspects of how do I deal with that personal problem space. Because it was really frustrating, actually, because it's hard. I'm the type of person who needs to wake up in the morning and go, okay, so now I have a purpose, and it can't be doing housework. I thought at first, I will have the cleanest house on the planet Earth. But I came to the realization that my house was not a mess and dirty because I was working full time. It's because I actually really don't care and don't like housework. See, that was a revelation. So the journey of self-discovery, if you will, was probably helped by the fact that I had a good school of design thinking, and I listened to a lot of people who are a lot smarter than I am on how to apply this in a variety of different circumstances. If you were ever a part of the guys from JSOW who do the shark and reimagining problems in terms of how to reimagine problems through their JAWS exercise, their Amity Island exercise. That actually is a really good tool for trying to figure out, okay, so how do I find another way to deal with this? How do I find another way to get a purpose and make it meaningful? And it actually made my retirement, until I decided to rejoin the workforce, much, much more fun and a lot more pleasurable in terms of life satisfaction. So that's kind of a very long, blabby kind of way of laying out in a rambly way. But that's kind of how design, it wasn't really adversity. It was just, I needed to figure something out. And this was actually a really good tool and a really good way to figure something out. I'm really fortunate because I've had a lot of really enjoyable professional experiences. I've had some lousy ones too, but on the whole, by and by, I had some really enjoyable professional experiences. Certainly, I'd say the highlight of my military career was when I was teaching down in the States. And so my biggest accomplishment was getting to be an assistant prof at the Command and General Staff College, Army University. That was a big moment for me. I really enjoyed my time working in the United States and with the U.S. Army. It was a real eye-opener for me because it was the first time I'd ever done a job where I came in not carrying really any baggage at all. And what I mean by that is I was one of the first women to join the Combat Arms in Canada. And when you're a singular, you're the only woman on this course and you're the only woman in this organization, you're the only woman on this, everybody knows who you are, whether you know them or not. And it was really refreshing to go to some place where you didn't have any of that. And so to go into that environment and thrive in that environment to the point where I was able to get an academic promotion through my scholarship, through a variety of writings, through my teaching, through a whole bunch of work that I did doing game design and a variety of other things. That, I would say, from a professional perspective, was very, very satisfying and was very, I look to that and say, yeah, that was a really good professional accomplishment. It kind of signaled that. So, I don't know if that really relates to design very much, but it certainly is. It's actually, I shouldn't say that, because it was where my ideas on design actually really came to fore. I was exposed to it in 2008 when I was at the Canadian Forces College, and I took my year-long program there. In the very start, we were doing systemic thinking and systemic methodologies. But then when we came around to, when I went to the US, they were doing Army design methodology. And that was my start point or entry into the design world. And I really enjoyed it. And it got me reading a whole bunch of other stuff and exposed to a whole bunch of other people. And then at CFC broadened that even more. And then I've been involved with the Archipelago of Design group for quite a while now. And it's really an interesting kind of build on. So I guess that would be my professional accomplishment, and actually was kind of the start point of my design journey, if you will. It's interesting because for the last, I don't know how many years, you cross paths with the same people, particularly in the military, because Canada doesn't have a very big military. So you cross paths with people all the time. And inevitably, you always say, oh, what a small world. And then I'll run into some of my US colleagues or, some of my more international colleagues in various locations when you don't expect to see them. And they say, oh, what a small world. The COVID-19 pandemic brought back that it's actually not a small world. It's quite a big world. And the challenge space with that is when you're on the other side of the world from your family, it is a big world. And that lifeline can be cut. Like I thought nothing of moving to Europe and living in Europe and having my kids being going to university in Canada until the pandemic hit. And then they have no place to live, right? Like those are things that you have to figure out, and you have to work, and you're on the other side of the world, and it's an 8-hour time difference or a 6-hour time difference, and you're trying to help, and you can do nothing when your elderly parents need assistance. I thought nothing. I'll hop a plane, but when there are no planes and the country won't let you in, or you can't get back into the country if you leave, then that becomes incredibly challenging. And you realize, in fact, it's not a small world, it's a very big world. And so you need to think about, how do you care for your family in a big world? So though it's something that brought all of us together, I think it's something that really brought home to me that the connections, those things that make this world small, can be undermined and go away like that. They're gone. And then how do you deal with that big world again? So that was what I learned from the pandemic. It wasn't a happy lesson. It was a very difficult lesson.